Hello, I'm Scott Raymond Jones, the editor of the 2016 Martian Migraine Press anthology CTHULHUSATTVA, Tales of the Black Gnosis. CTHULHUSATTVA drops on Monday, May 23rd, and in preparation for that, I've sat down with a number of the authors that are presenting their stories in the anthology. Tonight I have with me Luke Maynard, whose story, That Most Foreign of Veils, was easily one of my favorites, as it really captured a lot of the themes of that I was going for as editor for CTHULHUSATTVA. Luke, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Where are you right now?
I am.
What do you call home?
I'm in an undisclosed subterranean location in London, Ontario.
London, Ontario. Very good. So we have a couple of Canadian authors. Yourself, Jamie Mason, No Awareness, who actually used to live in Victoria, as you did. Now calls Toronto home. And your story, That Most Foreign of Veils, though the characters are imports from hotter places on the planet, does take place in the northern part of Manitoba, isn't it? I think.
I've sort of left it ambiguous. I've taken it as far north in Ontario as I could, which is a lot farther than people expect Ontario to go. And then it just sort of drops off the north end of the map after that into that sort of Here There Be Dragons region of Canada.
Yeah, that really shows. You really are able to evoke, the Canadian northern wastes. That's something that's always amazed me about our country, is that there is the very real possibility that there are actual stretches of land in Canada where no human foot has ever trod. You can see it. It's like we humans haven't really been here all that long, and it is a wasteland, true wilderness, edge country for sure. So, can you tell us a little bit more about that Most Foreign of Veils?
About the story.
Yeah.
Well, the story was sort of a conscious inclusion. In my case, I wrote it specifically for the anthology. Wrote it in the hopes that it would be that would fit the theme, because it's an unusual theme as far as Lovecraftiana goes. It's a really interesting. I think it's. I don't know. I think it's just an attempt to take what I know from Lovecraft and sort of push it into some new directions. One thing that I was not. I'm not that much of an authority on the elder signs. Dagon is not in the center of my awareness.
Right.
But what my first exposure to Lovecraft was that little preface supposedly written by the Mad Arab in the opening of the old trade paperback. I don't know if it was a Del Rey, the old trade paperback of
It's probably a Del Rey.
Of the Necronomicon, which I found at an age too young to know it was, not, too young to be sure it was fake.
Are we talking about? You mean the Simon Necronomicon?
That's the one, yeah.
Right. That's the Avonicom.
Okay.
Yeah, put out by Avon. Still doing gangbusters business. That book, amazing.
Yeah, very vague understanding of Lovecraft through that before I even came to Lovecraft proper.
Right.
As a kid, and what occurred to me is just, how, in some ways, how anachronistically off base the sort of Middle Eastern center of that little preface was.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I'm sure how much I thought of, in Lovecraft, what is in need of an update. And so much of his stuff just stands fine as it is, and will weather the ages perfectly. And that was one dimension that I thought could use a little nudge into sort of the 20th century descendant literature, I guess.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, something that appealed to me about your story is, of course, you've got something that you don't find in a lot of the classic Lovecraftian tales, both written by him and by his circle. And by his circle, I mean, of course, everyone who's ever sat down to pen a mythos story. You've got two main characters, basically, two sisters.
Yes, two Middle Eastern sisters, specifically from Yemen.
Right.
And I guess, I mean, that was a conscious decision as well. Again, thinking in terms of what Lovecraft descendants, don't have, what's missing. And I don't know, one of the cardinal rules that you hear all the time in fiction is to write what you know.
Mm.
So, I've never been to Yemen. This is, an entirely, this is in some sense a fracture of that rule.
Right.
But I don't, I mean, you can interpret it one of two ways. One is to say, live on a very small island and only write stories about that island. You get, all the time in mystery, you get this. You get the series about the old woman who's a quilter who solves murders in her spare time, and the series is written by an old woman who's a quilter who writes mystery books in her spare time. This is one interpretation of write what you know, and the other interpretation is that to be a writer is a challenge to go out and talk to people,
Yeah.
do research, know what you write rather than write what you know. And
Right.
so I took it as a challenge to look into some of these things that I think for a number of Canadians, especially right now, are a point of crisis because they're a point of the unknown. And it seemed in the spirit of the anthology of, looking into things that are unknown to most of us in our little suburban Anglo-centric towns, to challenge ourselves to know things on the outside of that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's what that's really what I was going for with the theme of the anthology is basically approaching the other. Sometimes with fear because sometimes that factors in. There's plenty of horrific tales, and there's horror in your story as well. It's quite grim in the third act. But at the same time, there's this idea within the anthology, and I think it's coming to the fore too in weird fiction, as a genre, and such a wide genre too. I mean, I don't even know if genre is the right word for it, but basically you have this embracing of the other. There's always some reservations with that embracing, but there's a feel in your story of that sort of moving forward into places where I think weird fiction is heading, because it's I think the weird is about making little maps of what is what our species is working itself towards. I think so. We need more stories like this one.
Yeah, I thank you. I hope I'm doing it justice. I know I'll never get it 100% right because I'm aware I'm playing in a sandbox that fundamentally doesn't belong to me. But at the same time, it's the only option is to go play in somebody else's sandbox.
True
Otherwise,
enough.
you stay in your own sandbox. The only worse criticism than the criticism of appropriation that you're taking something and using it wrong is that you never touch it, you never have anything to do with it,
Yeah.
and then you end up in the Lovecraft trap of every protagonist being this neurotic New Englander that remains trapped in this world and is desperate to get out of it. But to approach the border is to take a risk
Yeah.
um, that risk of getting things wrong. I mean, that's the crisis, the heart of so much of the ritual in Lovecraftian fiction. These things are full of people that get something wrong and it costs them dearly. So
Yeah.
that's something to overcome in the writing of this stuff as well.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine doing anything differently in writing that's about seeking boundaries, really.
Yeah, it's interesting in your story in that most foreign of veils, your main character gets it right. They go to visit their grandfather, who's basically sequestered himself away at the very edge of the world up in the north, and she learns the final lesson, and she gets it right, and she still loses something, but
That
it's worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I never really thought of it too heavily in terms of that big heavy hero's journey
Yeah,
mechanic when I was writing it. And of course, it's inescapable once you start thinking in those terms. It's there every station by station it's the same fundamental journey, and what always seems to come up is the idea of the sacrifice. If it's not a genuine, it doesn't map onto the journey properly unless there's some kind of sacrifice.
true
And
enough.
And so just being, my inner gamer says appropriately leveled for the challenge of the monster that you face. Um, there's the sense, and I mean, it comes out of Joseph Campbell and everybody else, that you're never given the quest that you're unprepared for. But at the same time, the idea that you walk into it and you can just, if you can complete the objective without being changed, that's a failure of the quest in itself.
Interesting. Yeah, we can thank Campbell for that for sure.
Yeah.
So so of course we're really excited to have your story in the book. It's one of 14, 14 stories, and as I mentioned, one of 3 Canadian authors. When we've got you're sharing the book with folks from England, folks from the States. I believe one author is actually currently living in Singapore. So it's a fairly international group, and we're glad to have you in there. And your story is definitely one of my. It's in my top 5. It's in my top 5. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you very much. I do appreciate it.
Yeah. So what's next for you in terms of writing? Where are you going with your writing career? Where else can we find your work?
I mean, the first place I can think of is in is elsewhere in Martian Migraine Press's oeuvre.
The first anthology. Yeah. Of course.
I've got a finished novel manuscript that's making the rounds. It's called The Seasons of the Plow, which is I want to say a more traditional fantasy novel. I guess it's a more traditional fantasy novel if you don't look too carefully.
Okay.
And it's making the agent rounds right now, and I'm just getting my head around the much greater process of it's the first novel length manuscript I've put out on the circuit, and I'm just getting a sense now of how much greater the ordeal it is to manage the revision process and keep continuity straight for 80,000 words, and manage juggling the synopses of the appropriate size. So it's a learning experience. I feel like I've done a lot of writing and very little publishing. So
Right.
that's so the process of using this year to sort of start getting this material into the transformative space of sharing it with people is it's a whole second discipline. Learning to write just doesn't prepare you for it. So that's the learning curve I'm on now.
That's very true, and it's great to watch you on it. It's great to watch you traveling that curve. You're on your own journey, sir. Fantastic.
Great.
Yeah.
It's I appreciate the help on the way. I mean, every publisher at this point is another talking animal companion on that hero's journey, the wise owl, or the nitpicking, comma-fixing penguin, or whatever the animal in question is.
Gotcha. Well, we'll leave out what sort of animal you think I am for now. We'll save that for another time. Luke, I want to thank you for coming and chatting with me. I know you're busy. So the anthology is called CTHULHUSATTVA, Tales of the Black Gnosis. It is coming from Martian Migraine Press. You'll be able to read Luke's story as well as many others. We're going to be talking to other authors as we get closer to publication date. My name is Scott Jones. You can go to martianmigrainepress.com to pre-order for the next, depending on when this airs. Basically, right now it's what? It's the 10th, isn't it? It's May 10th, yeah. Tuesday, May 10th. Friday, May 13th is the last day you can pre-order. And, of course, there are contest details on the website. You could win lots of excellent Black Gnosis swag, which I'm very excited to get out there. Thanks again, Luke, and we will talk to you again. Take care, sir.
Take care.
All right, bye-bye.